Before we even get started, I want to set the tone of this conversation. I am here second day without power. I have no internet at the house. I haven't showered in 3 days.
Oh, that's what that is.
No, it's not that bad, but it's pretty damn bad. Now go ahead and tell me how great it was. How
You forgot the whole I'm eating rice here.
Yeah, exactly. Starving, as you can see.
That's going to be in our tag
So go ahead and
cloud.
tell me how this wasn't a big deal, please.
Well, Andy.
Hi, welcome to DTLT today.
Hi, how are you? I'm
We're
Jim Groom.
talking about the hurricane and whether a natural disaster can be hyped or not. Some people think it can be. I've got my opinions, but Jim, go ahead. What'd you think of the hurricane? A big yawn?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, let's be clear though, because Tim's pretending like I'm trying to kind of generalize. Unlike national media, I don't have to generalize because I don't appeal to. Oh, Miles and Tess, hi.
Hi, Tess and Miles.
I don't have to appeal to everyone. I only have to appeal to the local people who are following it. And the whole hurricane cast on DS106 Radio we did was basically, I went out on an hourly basis and said, here's the situation of the hurricane in Fredericksburg. Now, what happened, Tim was, reporting from Richmond, and I could hear the winds blowing. It was serious there. For some reason, I don't know why, Fredericksburg, I mean, there's a, meteorological reason, we got basically a bad rainstorm. That's all it was.
Yeah,
We got missed.
we
And
got
I'm
lucky.
not saying, look, Vermont got crushed.
Right.
Parts of North Carolina, if you saw those pictures in the Outer Banks, not to know, you should look at this online. The Outer Banks got crushed.
Yeah.
Like,
Route 12?
Yeah, once again near Hatteras, they
12.
had
Yeah.
several sections of road that were
Just
just
missing.
eaten away or missing or completely upended.
yeah.
And they had, I think it was back in Isabel where they had a new inlet that was created because of the hurricane, and they called it Isabel Inlet. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but I think it's too early to say like what's gotten created and that sort of thing with this particular storm. But there's some amazing pictures out there.
Well, it blew me away because I get on Twitter, and luckily I was able to because, one, my father-in-law has a house generator. So we hook up the house generator.
Is he a survivalist?
He's he's a little how would I say? He's a little miserly with the generator. It's sort of like, oh, you've had your shower. Boom.
Does he
It's like you don't need anything else.
Does
you
he
know?
watch this show?
Tractor beam off.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like
So-
Obi-Wan at the tractor
as soon as
beam.
I found out we could hook the modem to the room that had the power going and everything and have internet, I was like, oh, this is great. And so I'm going on Twitter because we didn't have Verizon signal, couldn't use my phone at all for calls, text messages, nothing. It's completely dead, no power. And I get on Twitter and I see people on there going, man, where'd the storm go? Why'd the media hype this up? And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy for someone to say that, but at the same time, we've got the TV going, and they're talking about how a woman in Newport News lost her baby in the storm and everything, and I'm like, oh yeah, tell her that the storm was hyped up, that there wasn't enough coverage about the dangers of the hurricane. I
Right.
mean, it
Well,
seems like they were disappointed about the fact that it didn't come to them, which I don't really get.
Well, that's the whole generalization argument. And Andy, interrupt if I didn't mean to jump on you, but
That's okay.
one of the things that's interesting is that we have the media and the means now to do targeted searches for information that's useful to us.
Yeah.
And the fact that so many people are bemoaning how bad the coverage was on CNN or weather or, Fox, God forbid, it's like, why are you following those channels? It's
Right.
like, Martha made this point already, and she said she's going to write a blog post about it, but I'll steal it because she's not here. She spent the whole basic weekend following local small media to find out what happened in North Carolina, what was happening here, and just being able to contact people like we can with Twitter and Facebook or whatever.
Right.
It changes the whole dynamic. It's like why people are depending upon CNN, and then people like what's his name, Jarvis,
Yeah.
reacting so strongly. It's like
Right.
what? I'm not so interested in all that because I'm doing my own little thing and following it. And I like the hype personally because I kind of, I like to be part of it.
Sure.
But even when I tried to with DS106 radio, it's like there was nothing to hype about at Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
Right.
Nothing.
Early on, Jeff Jarvis had, I think he used a hashtag storm porn. And it was this basic idea that all the big wigs, all the big networks were covering this story in such a way that he thought it was almost, in a way, damaging and almost the Boy Who Cried Wolf, where you relentlessly say how bad it's going to be, and then if it doesn't turn out to be that way, people stop watching the networks. And in many ways, I would argue that people should stop watching it for not just the repetition about Irene, but any other news story that's out
Yeah,
there.
exactly. Politics.
Right.
Here's my question, though, with that. What's the alternative? Because
Yeah.
I can guarantee you that Jeff Jarvis, along with everyone else, would be up in arms if all of the major TV networks said, yeah, probably not going to be a big deal. I mean, it's the hurricane's coming, but, you know, I mean, maybe get yourself an extra jug of water or something, but it's
Yeah.
not going to be a big deal. And, I mean, 18 people died, and, you know, and that's not even all the numbers counted yet because they still don't even have access to all the areas where the hurricane hit. And so it's sort of like, what would have been a big deal at this point?
Yeah.
If this wasn't a big deal, what would have been? And what would have been a good response for the media then if they had just said, yeah, it's probably not going to happen?
He talked about the repetition, and here's what I heard repeated over and over: be prepared, get a kit, stay indoors.
Yeah.
Now, some of the other stuff, and actually, I get a kick out of the Weather Channel people going out into it and watching
Oh, yeah.
their clothes, you know, flap in the breeze and that sort of thing. And, you know, I know that they're doing it for an effect, and they're a little sensationalistic when it comes to these storms. But you can also tell that, you know, that's their job that they love. You know, that's the stuff that they really enjoy doing. And so I don't mind watching them do it. The problem that I have is that then every other network has to have their guy out in the wind
Yeah.
demonstrating the same thing. And that's the part of Jarvis's point that I agree with, is that there's just too much of that. And why don't we concentrate on the people who cover this stuff really well?
Well, and the thing that I think is also a problem is this idea of 24/7 coverage. And I
Right.
saw this even, you see it all the time with like the headline news networks where they literally do have to run a channel 24/7 and figure out how are they even going to fill it with content. So it's just crap content that they're putting out there. And so they love
Right.
storms like this because
Yep.
then they've got their content. They'll just keep going back to their weathermen. They'll
Yeah.
keep those videos on loop. And I get that. But that seems to become even more of a problem with the local news channels when things like this happen. They feel like, oh, we can't just show Bones, or we can't show Criminal Minds or any other television show because we need to go to this breaking news content where yet again our reporters out there standing in the rain talking about how it might become bad maybe.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, as I'm watching this coverage, I'm wondering, so what if some other news story, you know, infects the media during this hurricane? You know, how do they gauge what the importance is? What happens if there is, you know, a huge earthquake on the other end of the country? And you know, how do
Right.
they balance that? And I wonder if they can even make that decision intelligently. I don't know. And or what if we were able to predict that? What if we were able to say you're going to have a hurricane on this particular date, and it's going to be this magnitude? You know, what would the hype have been? I think a lot of people would have said, well, here's what's going to happen, but there's all this unpredictability that you don't know. And we got lucky with the hurricane. I think that's good news.
Yeah.
It could have been worse,
Right.
but it wasn't, and I think we're thankful for that. And one of the things that I also think about is that apparently there were some people who didn't get the message, and I don't want to denigrate any of the people, but you know, there would have been less death if people did stay indoors. I understand that some people need to be out and traveling or got caught out there, but there are people who are wantonly like going out and driving just to be in it.
Yeah, or
And there's situations where there's no traffic,
Right.
and they don't know what to do. When there's a traffic signal that's out, people just barrel through the intersection as opposed to what they should do is turn it into a four-way stop. So there's things like that people still don't get after being told over and over again about this. And I wonder if the repetition is harmful for that reason, or whether we're just not listening. We're not listening to the right places. I think Martha's idea about where to listen is great, is that, you know, take
what
the
about
pieces
this-
that make sense to you.
Well, I'm a couple of things. First, I'm disappointed that my kids no longer want to watch me. They want to watch Popeye. I'm pissed at you, Miles and Tess, and I'm coming for you. But Brian and Alto, thanks for staying
Wow.
true.
Popeye.
But one of the things that's like, you know, did you guys follow in Virginia Beach? There was those streakers. Bunch of
Oh yeah,
kids, they were
yeah. I
out
was
getting
watching it.
drunk.
The Weather Channel
Yeah.
guy's out there, and he says, "I don't understand, you know, why these people aren't indoors." And the guy's flashing his goods.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the whole thing is like the actual hype culture around that makes that, you know, in somewhat a possibility. It's like, people are going to get on this
Right.
thing, and so they're doing it. And it's like, the thing I can't stop thinking about in all this is, how does this relate to something like Katrina?
Uh-huh.
Like, think about the hype cycle around Katrina, which I think was relatively small compared to what we
Yep.
had for something like Irene. And is it because Katrina was such a tragedy, and
Yep.
it was?
Mhm.
And the questions that don't get brought up is like, you're either stupid for not listening, or you're smart for listening to the news, or maybe something in between. It's like, what about the socioeconomic realities of people who can't do anything? And, we
Right.
got lucky with Irene for the most part, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Vermont got killed. Brian Alexander's up there showing some crazy pictures, so I'm feeling for those people. But, if this was a really devastating storm, and it did devastate beyond, I'm not saying it wasn't, but beyond like Tim not being able to take a shower and all his little Western concerns. Like,
My first
beyond
world
that,
problems.
I mean, there is real situations with this of a kind of structural problem that we can't get out of. And I think, New Orleans is the real lesson in that. It's like,
Right.
the hype doesn't really save lives, I
Right.
don't think.
And I think
What really would save lives is a true kind of FEMA action, and a certain amount of common sense certainly saves lives. But I mean, some of this stuff goes beyond common sense, like how well your house is built, how tight your community is.
It's
Do
still
you have a car?
it still becomes this competition. Irene wasn't as big as Isabel, so we're disappointed about that, and I still don't get that.
That's ridiculous.
We're thankful that Irene wasn't as big as Isabel. I mean, one of the reasons that Isabel was so big is because it went straight over Virginia and headed out towards Lake Erie. So it completely engulfed this area. And I lived also in a different place where I had more trees. But there's a lot more damage, a lot more power outages in Fredericksburg than there was, for this storm, for Irene.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, is that Irene, all told, I think had as many power outages. They were just in different places. And different places, like in Virginia Beach, like the family that lost their son with a tree that fell on their house,
Yeah.
that was a devastating storm to them. And I do have a problem
Absolutely.
with minimizing it or saying that there's too much hype when it comes to reporting about natural disasters. Yes, there's some silliness, and I would like to get rid of the silliness. I would like to think that our news coverage would be completely, serious and above board when they're trying to inform us. But our news media is not about informing us. That is not their motivation. Their motivation is to hype Irene to be bigger than the last storm, and
so that they can get viewers.
and so that they can get viewers, exactly. So, I mean, that's what is driving all this, and that's the problem that I have with the analysis of somebody like Jarvis, who is pretending like their job is to inform us.
Well, I'm probably as guilty as anybody of, in the heat of the moment, like wanting the storm to be bigger. I was doing some broadcasting on the radio, and I was like, oh man, I love this, and bring the trees down and bring the rain and everything. But I have to say, the next day when I was out there and there was a tree in our driveway and I was cutting wood all day, and today my back hurts, I'm sort of like, thank God it wasn't as bad as it could have been, because,
Right.
I mean, we had one tree down and we spent 7 hours out there, chainsaws, cutting it up, lugging the wood to the ditch next door and everything, and trying to help out some people next door to us. And I mean, it was just insane just from the little amount that it was. And it really was, for me, like, I felt like everything that I put on Twitter, I should have been putting the first world problems hashtag with, because I seriously felt like this is not as big a deal as it could have been.
That's a good point. Somebody tweeted, during the hurricane, someone in Beirut or someone who knows something about Beirut, I can't remember, but they said, we've got power outages in our country right now, and it doesn't have anything to do with the hurricane. It has more to do with our political situation. So there is that, but
Think
also
about Irene versus like Libya.
Right.
Like, I mean, think about what the freedom fighters, or whatever you want to call them,
Sure.
in Libya are doing, and how many of them go down on a daily basis and dealing with this atrocious tyranny.
Well, but Al Roker tweeted something about, are you kidding me? You're calling this hype when these many people died? And someone said, well, more people die in Iraq, and so he said, okay, and that's bad. But that doesn't make our coverage of a major event any less.
Well, it does make it. It does
important.
make it more problematic when you're not covering international affairs, which is something that U.S. media intentionally and traditionally has done.
Sure.
So you have a 24-hour news cycle about a storm that I'm not saying is insignificant, Tim.
Yeah.
But I am saying is, does not define the world. But the news media, and this is the point you're making about Jarvis, does this regularly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just Irene. Just seems to be the occasion. It does this regularly. I mean, how much really good reporting have we had on Afghanistan and Iran and what's really happening there? None. You know, and if
It's
you're
few
doing
and far
it, it's
between.
not coming from any major network.
Right.
I mean, there's basically a blackout on news that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And Irene's not that it's unimportant, but I don't feel like, you know, that Al Roker or anyone who says that is being intentionally necessarily fair, because we're not giving everything, you know, the same amount of attention.
No, and well, I mean, but for me, in terms of viewership, they're going to have more U.S. viewers. So I would rather them see more coverage of Irene right now in the past couple of days. Now, if we were talking like last week and they were giving more coverage to American Idol than they were Libya or something like that, yeah, I'm going to
Well, I
purpose.
wouldn't
I'm
be
going to
surprised if they did.
They probably would, yeah, and I'd be equally as outraged about that. But you
Well,
know,
let's think about it.
I think you give them a bit of a pass when there's a major U.S. event happening that they say, you know what, let's focus on that major U.S. event because we have a lot of U.S. people watching our station right now and wanting to know what's happening with this.
But I think that's different than suggesting that any kind of media is trying to aim for an informed public.
Oh, sure.
I don't think that's what the goal is.
The other problem that I've had with this during the whole coverage is that the event is still not over yet. We still have issues of flooding. We still have issues of dams that are on the red line in terms of about to break kind of thing. So we still don't really know the full impact. There are plenty of people who die in the flooding after the hurricane. So to say that this has been overhyped and it didn't live up to its potential, we're still not there yet. And I hope that it doesn't live up to that potential. But we've still got a ways to go, and we just kind of need to let this stuff, play itself out. The other point that I wanted to make about Jarvis, that I do agree, is that his basic, where he leaves this, is to say, news organizations, media in general, need to figure out where the value add comes in. You know, we've got all these small networks that can report out this stuff in this quick and easy manner. Let's take all that, aggregate them, and then figure out where to add to it. They should be doing things like, repeating where the shelters are, repeating what to do in a storm, as opposed to, here we've got some great footage of somebody out in Virginia Beach with the naked guys running behind them. Or this tree just fell down on a power line and here's a fire. That's good information, but somebody else is going to cover that in a better way. Let's stop repeating ourselves. And Jarvis makes a good point there.
Well, there's also, you think about 2000, before September 11th, think about the news cycle leading up for the summer. Does you guys remember what the topic was? Right before September 11th changed everything.
Summer of the Shark, baby.
Summer of the Shark. And that to me is just like exactly what you're saying. Yeah, Jarvis may be saying that's what big news industries need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's his kind of maybe ethical call. But frankly, it's not going to happen. Like, they are going to go
Yeah,
for the most sensational story, even if it's made up, like the Summer of the Shark.
Right.
There was no more shark attacks that summer
Yep.
than there are on a regular basis. It just became the news cycle because they needed to exploit.
Yep.
And that's why I think thinking about localized and smaller news agencies or even people
Yeah.
as our kind of correspondents has some value. Now, the problem is, how do you organize that to do some real investigative reporting? There's a lot of things we can't let go of.
Yeah.
But, I don't think our major media networks, CNN or, Fox or any of them, are in any danger of doing serious investigative reporting. So we can leave that alone and go to something else.
I think that's what we need to do is really start to educate people to try to find those best of breed, news outlets or ways of getting the news to really truly inform them.
Well, and I think citizen journalism is going to become this huge thing here, and the question of it is, how do you aggregate that, and how do you make the good stuff rise to the top and make sure that people see what they need to see for it? Right now, ironically, a lot of people are taking pictures and video and everything, and where are they uploading it? They're putting it on Facebook on these news organizations' websites. They're giving it right back to them, and those news organizations are just saying, okay, as soon as he comes back from this video of our guy standing out there by the ocean, then we'll pull up a couple Facebook pictures of what these people sent us. You don't need the news organization. We can become this media outlet ourselves if we can aggregate it in the right way.
Yeah, and that brings up an issue that I think about, that almost goes to the corporatization of education. There is this kind of corporatization of newsmen or newswomen on the spot. With CNN's iReport, Fox I think has something called U Report. It's this idea that you're taking the citizen journalist and you're making them a star, but you're almost kind of corporatizing that reporting that they're doing when they really could be doing the stuff out on their own, and someone else could be finding it.
Do the work for us,
Exactly.
and we'll just monetize
Exactly.
and throw some ads on
I mean,
it.
not
Right.
go back. It's 10 years to the day almost now, and not going to go back to 9/11 again. But the thing that struck me most about September 11th, when I was in New York City and that was happening, is if you turned on the major news networks, that was the only time in my life I can remember there was no advertising.
Yeah.
And it's like everyone in that kind of job had been hit over the head with a bat.
Right.
And they all were sitting there looking at you stunned, like they had some real insane news they didn't understand and they couldn't spin yet.
Right.
They
Yeah.
did, but they couldn't spin it yet.
Yeah, that's right.
And like the Emperor's clothes were laid bare for
Yeah.
like 24 hours.
There wasn't
on
the
news.
fancy 3D graphics
Yeah.
and the cutaway to this or that
And it
or
was
whatever.
basically
it was
also
just,
the
this is what's
time where we
happening.
saw the emergence, right, of social media as an alternative means to get real information, like where are people?
Yep.
How do we locate people? Blogs came up as a kind of, that's when they kind of, I mean, if the Iran election is when Twitter came into its being.
Yeah.
I think it was September 11th where blogs, both as reactions politically, but also as just people out there sharing their insane experiences
Sure.
or looking for others. I mean, it was this weird kind of moment where that distributed network was far more valuable in a real moment of horror than some centralized talking head who's basically trying to sell you something at the same time of inform you. And the two are often competing. It's not just like the one, just that's why I think Jarvis's view is kind of uninteresting to me. He's like, how come we still make these business models viable? It's like, when the hell were they viable?
Yeah, or valuable.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe
Well,
that's cynical, but
And I'm just saying, it's going to get big. I mean, I already read, with the earthquake that we had, which wasn't a major event on Twitter, I think they said there were 40,000 tweets in the first couple seconds
Right.
after the event
Exactly.
happened. So
Well, and-
things like that are going to be more important.
Well, and it was interesting. I use TweetDeck as my Twitter thing, and watching the Irene hashtag go past was it was a blur.
Right.
And that was interesting because that kind of thing happens with different events. But
So again, the important is how do you take out from that information what you need to know and
Yeah.
what we can get information
there
from
is
it.
no way, which I kind of like. I mean, frankly, I think that's part of the joy of it. I mean, but talking about things we like and don't like, one of our commenters in the chat, Brian, says, I didn't like September 11th.
Okay.
It's good to
do you
know
want
that
to
someone else-
I'm
do you
glad
want to
he's on
elaborate
record.
about that, Brian? Would you like to can we?
I'm glad he's on record as being anti 9/11.
didn't
good.
like it.
Yeah, not a fan.
was not good.
Not a
I
fan
agree.
at all.
I think that's a pull-out quote.
I think we ought to wrap things up here. But
I think we've probably gone a little long today.
here's hoping, in addition to me having power and internet back tonight, that most people are safe from this thing with
Absolutely.
Well,
more
thank God.
important,
I
more
mean-
important fish to fry.
Yeah, frankly, I mean, that's, no one really wants to deal with the... We're I mean, as a culture right now, we're seduced by apocalypse,
Yeah.
but we
Right.
would be we wouldn't know what the hell to do if
Oh
it
yeah,
came.
we're
Yeah.
weaklings in this.
I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like, good luck. Remember White Noise by Don DeLillo? That novel basically is like there's a cloud of apocalypse that comes over a town, and no one is any use because no one has to do anything anymore. Like
Right.
no one can explain how a TV works, or how to build one, or a computer,
Right.
or in that case a refrigerator. It's like we'd be useless in the event of a real apocalypse. Like the only person who would probably survive is Tom Woodward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on that
And
note,
Antonella.
I think we should cut it. Tom and Antonella.
Tom and
Good to
Antonella.
know.
And maybe they would get together and they would be the future. Adam and Eve.
Wow.
A race of superhumans.
Yeah.
Superhuman Italians.
On that note,
Yeah.
with several notes to leave you on today.
Yeah. This was a...
DTLT today.
Thanks for watching.
Take it out.
Go.
And stay tuned for the mobile learning!